AI will get real when it's able to augment our daily lives through smart devices and personal data. This week on Utilizing AI, we're diving into the news about AI assistance, local processing, and the risks when AI gets us wrong. Welcome to Utilizing AI, the podcast focused on practical applications of artificial intelligence from the Futurum Group. Each episode brings together diverse perspectives to explore news and use cases of the ways in which AI is transforming enterprise IT and the infrastructure it serves. I'm your host, Stephen Foskett, president of Tech Field A Business Unit here at the Futurum Group, and I'm joined today by a couple of other folks. Let's meet them.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brad Shimmin. I'm VP and Practice Lead for Data Intelligence, Analytics, and Infrastructure at Futurum.
And I'm Olivier Blanchard, Research Director and Practice Lead for AI Devices at Futurum as well.
So each week we talk about the ways that AI is really getting real in the enterprise, and we're going to get a little personal this week. In fact, we're going to talk about the ways in which all of us are using AI. This was a big topic at AI Field Day last week, as we talked about with Nick Patience on Utilizing AI. And it is going to, I think, sort of head off some of the concerns people have about AI, as well as raise some new ones. So let's kick it off a little bit. Olivier, I think people have this vision generally that AI involves massive data centers somewhere, sucking down power, building giant models, slurping up all of human knowledge, all that kind of stuff. But really, that's not where this industry is headed.
No, it's not. That it partly is where it's headed, but I think that we have to understand that there are essentially two phases to this AI digital transformation that we're going through. One is training the models, right, which requires a lot of GPUs and a lot of data center resources in order to be able to just keep developing the new ones and training them, et cetera. But the real scale, when we achieve it, is going to be in inference. And inference is basically when the assistants and the agents are doing the work that you want them to do, that they've been trained to do. And so you have these two competing sort of resource-rich models of data centers and data centers plus something else. And the something else is really the edge. It's intelligent devices, which is my focus. So it's smartphones, it's PCs, it's smart television, smart speakers, smart glasses. I'm pointing to my glasses. They're actually dumb glasses. There's no technology in them, but you know what I'm talking about. And other devices that we haven't seen yet. Like even your cars are getting smart. So a lot of this inference, a lot of this processing at the edge, which is much faster and much more secure because the interactions that you have with your device and with the portion or the layer of the model that's running on your device as opposed to running in the cloud is much closer. So the interactions are immediate. There's no lag. And also they're a little bit more secure because the data, your queries and then the responses are not having to travel to a data center somewhere and then travel back to your device. So there's this development of AI capabilities through chips and software that is going to come out increasingly out of the cloud, out of the data centers, and move to the devices that we're all surrounded by on a daily basis. And that's going to radically change, first of all, how we allocate resources to AI, but also how we interact with AI.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get sucked into this sort of hype around data centers and the fact or the idea that we can't do this without standing up nuclear reactors in Idaho somewhere to make this happen. And it does bother me to see that because the idea that, Olivier, you just mentioned about this being a huge difference between training and inferencing. And when we first stumbled upon generative AI, the idea was that, we're all going to be investing in huge GPU farms and it's all going to be about training. And as we've learned over the last couple of years, it's not about that at all. I mean, it is for a select number of frontier model makers. And I think it's safe to say that many of the innovations that Olivier you're talking about are built on the shoulders of those frontier models. So they do matter, but it's not that we're all doing it all day. What matters most to most people, whether you're a consumer or in the enterprise, is that you are able to have an inferencing experience with a model that is secure and reliable and performant. And you don't have to do that in the cloud. There, there are some situations, right, where if I'm a small company and I'm trying to secure my data center, am I going to do a better job of that, or is Microsoft Azure going to do a better job of that? And if you can run everything inside of their VPC, then great. That's going to be you're going to be a lot better off than if you were just trying to do it on-prem yourself. But if you're a large organization, especially one that has to deal with, external controls over security and governance, you're going to want that control. And as you just mentioned, certainly if you're a consumer, I want to run this on my device, on my laptop, and I want to know that everything I say to my pet model stays on my machine. That's critical.
Yeah, we're already starting to see that. But I just want to make one more point to your question, Stephen, and it's that both the hardware, so the chips themselves, are becoming much more efficient in performing these AI workloads, whether it's training or inference, but also the models themselves, the software, are becoming more efficient. And so when we talk about the massive expenditures, right? I think it's like over 400 billion this year alone from Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and basically like the four cloud players, right? 400 billion to build data centers. But the reality is that if you look 5 years into the future, every year the models that we could only run in the cloud can now run on devices. And we're seeing this happen year after year after year. And so I feel like we're planning for a scale of data center capacity that makes sense today, but that doesn't make sense in 4 years or 5 years, when a lot of these models won't need that many GPUs and that many data center resources to run, right? And so it seems that we're not really having the conversation, or we're not addressing the reality of those efficiency gains year after year, generation over generation, and that we're barreling forward with these massive investments in data centers that we may not need, at least not for training. For other things, maybe. Obviously, we're gathering a lot of data, so I think that we have to store a lot of data from users that are interacting with AI. There's a lot of that happening, but in terms of building massive data centers to train models, that doesn't make sense in the long term. It just doesn't.
Well, I think that we needed that to get to where we're going, right? We needed to be able to build those models, because we couldn't have built, Llama or Claude or Gemini without that kind of investment. But now that we have it, I think that we're seeing, well, at least in popular impression, is that we're seeing sort of diminishing returns on investment in terms of the quality of the models. Essentially, the fourth generation models are really, really good. The LLMs are, and the same is with many of the other models that we're using. I mean, image generation has gotten extremely good. Video generation is still a little sketchy, but it's getting there. And translation and sort of speech to text and so on, that has just gotten basically good enough that we don't need to worry about it anymore. And as you said, what happens then is that those things get quantized and they are then run on end user devices. And as you said as well, it's important to note that these devices have gotten just exponentially better. And I don't use that word lightly. If you compare, for example, I have a NVIDIA Jetson board over here with a 32-bit CUDA from way back when. If you compare what that board can do with what's in this phone, well, it's not just night and day. It's like a different planet. The inferencing in ARM chips from Apple, from Google, from Qualcomm, from many others is getting so much better, so much quicker, that we're able to run locally what we never would have dreamed that we could. As well as some of the other supporting infrastructure. We're seeing a lot more use of large amounts of unified memory. There's a lot of news about the NVIDIA Spark that just came out, which has just a tremendous amount of unified memory. But essentially, the architecture is very similar to Apple's system on chip architecture. And it's interesting to see the ways that the technology is improving and allowing us to run this stuff locally. And at the same time, to your point, it's not just about the hardware; it's about the software. One of the things that I love is that we've applied many of the lessons of cloud computing to AI, in that essentially now we're getting to the point where we don't necessarily know where the model is running. Now, sometimes we do. I installed, Olama on my Mac, and I, installed Mac Whisper, and I know that those are running locally. But when you look at what companies, especially companies like Google and Apple, are doing in terms of making these models transparent from the device to the cloud, it is really remarkable. And I want to dive into that. There's been some rumors this week that Apple is finally, we can say finally, right? Rolling out
Sure.
the next generation Siri with an LLM behind it soon. I put an asterisk after soon. We don't know when. And we don't even know if this is true, but there's been a lot of people suggesting that they're going to be using a special model built by Google. Apparently, they had a bake-off between Google and Anthropic. They picked the Google solution because Google was able to basically do the things Apple needed to do to build this next generation Siri. So let's talk about that a little bit, Olivier. Those questions. I mean, already when you're using the Apple Intelligence features, you don't know whether it's running on device or in the cloud, but you do know that it's protected, and you do know that it's seamless, right?
Yeah. So I think that the most extreme example of this that I've seen was from Samsung earlier in the year when they released the S25 or the Galaxy. And they had a custom chip from Qualcomm. So basically, it was the Snapdragon, but they made one for Galaxy specifically. And what they did is they created two layers for their agentic capabilities. One was essentially sort of the general AI that you would use, which is Android and it's Gemini. And I'm a power user of Gemini, so I'm really thrilled that Gemini might be behind Siri, because it means that Siri will finally be good. Um, but also they had they created this on device inside of the firewall post encryption security capability where they can run models and actually do training on the device for hyper personalized agentic experiences. And so this is kind of like a first run, first generation. I don't have I don't have high expectations for what it's going to be able to deliver. But as a concept of creating this ultra secure, ultra hyper personalized agentic capability on device, and then using orchestration, essentially AI on the device to decide, okay, this is stuff that needs to stay on the device, and this is stuff that can go out to Gemini, right? And building that model is sort of, I think, the first step to creating this true multimodal and hybrid AI model that just draws from the cloud when it needs to, and then just stays on device when it can. And the recent discussions I've had with Google, and they're very, very strong in this. And they have device ecosystem, they have a software ecosystem. They're in Gmail, they're in Google Docs, they're everywhere, right? Their trajectory, I feel, is trying to create a space where you don't necessarily know, or if you don't want to, you don't need to know where the inference is happening, if it's in the cloud or on device, so long as you get the best features, the best user experience. And if you do, for security reasons or because you want to optimize your experience, want to move certain things on device and keep some things in the cloud, they'll give you a sort of a dashboard or an ability to do that. So it's really exciting. And again, as a huge fan of Gemini, and having been disappointed in Apple's inability to develop their own in-house AI for their own stack, I feel like this time, as they did with OpenAI, I think that this is the right partner for what they're trying to accomplish with their device ecosystem.
And I have to wonder, did they were they unable to, or were they simply, unsure if they should? Because even though Stephen, you mentioned that it's seamless, I found with the first iteration of Apple Intelligence, when they brought in OpenAI, that they were very deliberate in separating the two out, what was local and what was being sent on to OpenAI,
Well,
and I liked that. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, that's interesting. Yes, they're very deliberate in separating OpenAI from Apple Intelligence, but that's only the OpenAI boundary. The Apple Intelligence stuff is also AI and is also running seamlessly. Yeah.
Agreed. And okay, think back just a couple of years, maybe 10 or 15. We were all using our swipe typing keyboards on Android phones, and they were getting really good at predicting what the word was supposed to be that I was trying to type out, like infrastructure. And they did that through a technique that's been around for quite some time called federated learning. And what federated learning did was allowed us to basically train a really good model in the cloud without actually having to send on everything I typed on my swiping head keyboard to do it. And so it did it securely. There are techniques like that. And I think the other one is differential privacy is another one. And we're seeing it start to evolve now with these smart routing capabilities within a lot of agentic platforms that all focus on this sort of seamless sort of movement to optimize that inferencing so that it's performant, secure, and you get the best model for the job at hand. So I love that about the way our market's evolving right now is it's not trying to be, oh, you're all in on the cloud or you're all in on the edge or device. It's saying, we have the right tools for the right job. Let's apply it so everyone's happy.
Yeah. And that's kind of the point. I think that I was very impressed by what Apple announced in 2024 at WWDC for the Apple Intelligence features, simply because what they weren't announcing was a giant do-it-all Copilot LLM. What they were announcing was a suite of features that enhance the operating system with intelligence, with AI, and it really is AI as well as integration with OpenAI. Now, I am not impressed by the fact that Apple completely dropped that ball and apparently internally knew that they were dropping that ball and decided to try to do a rebound and take another year to try to bring it to market. Because they really, really missed. And I think that this is very public, egg on their face.
Timing is everything.
Delivering these features that they promised for the iPhone 17, I don't know, there's 16. But the point is, that they didn't deliver what they were promising. They did deliver, I think, some of the framework. And right now, if you're whether you're using a Mac or you're using an iPhone, if you do things like there's a summarize text, there's a key points, and those are using Apple's own LLMs, and those really do run either locally or in the cloud, depending on whatever iOS decides to do. Very like what Olivier described from what Samsung is doing. It's just they're not very good, and that's a big problem, I think, for a lot of users. So I find myself actually using Gemini and ChatGPT for tasks that Apple Intelligence ought to be able to do, simply because Apple Intelligence doesn't do it well. But I'm hopeful, hope springs eternal, that they'll actually deliver that in not in iOS 18, but in iOS 26, which is a big jump.
Right.
Or is it 27? I don't know.
Yeah.
Will it be 27?
And the other thing that I was interested in is, so Apple announced this private cloud compute concept at the time in 2024, which is a really cool idea, which was that they were going to have their own ARM-based servers, and they would be able to burst your data into a secure enclave running on this ARM-based server, and it would keep it secure to you. It would be just the same as if it was your machine for that couple of instants that it takes to spin up the model with your data and run it. But then I noticed, actually just a couple of weeks ago, Apple announced that they shipped the first homegrown server for Apple's private cloud compute, which makes me say, wait a second, I thought you did that last year. So maybe they didn't. I don't know. Or maybe they're using
announced and delivered.
So I don't want to say I'm losing my faith in Apple, because I love their idea, but the execution has really left a lot to be desired.
Yeah, there's not always a very clear timestamp on what they do. No, but okay, I'm an Android user. In a sea of Apple users, everyone I know has an iPhone except for me.
Boo,
In my social circles
green
at home,
SMS. Boo.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sorry. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
exactly right. Yes,
You're blue.
I'm triggered. Thanks for that. But essentially, what the joke among those of us who are in the Android ecosystem is that whenever Apple, especially with a new iPhone release, announces all these cool new features, there's always this shock, right? Like, you guys didn't have this yet. Like, we've had this for 3 to 5 years, and I feel like that's kind of like the MO for Apple, right? They used to be a very innovative company, and to some extent they are. Their silicon's fantastic, their designs are great, but in terms of features, they really wait until the Android ecosystem has sort of tried and tested a feature, and it's baked in, and it's really easy to replicate or to adapt to the to the iOS ecosystem. And for me, it's disappointing because I'm old enough to remember when Apple was innovating. Now they're just kind of following, and so I think that the same kind of internal culture of product and feature development might have been the reason they missed on AI. And they might have thought they had more time than they actually did.
Yeah,
And so now they're playing
lest
catch
we
up the way
get
they always do.
into iOS and Android fanboys. That is not going to be the topic of this whole show or this
All right,
series.
all right, all right.
Maybe another
I'll
show
stop
when we
That
do another
being
one.
said, yes, Apple
Yeah,
has a fast follower,
right.
fast best follower approach to technology. Yes.
Sure. Well,
That's okay. It has served
yeah,
them well
good
because
good
they
follower approach.
have, a diehard fan base that still lines up for
Yeah.
the orange aluminum, whatever they're shipping at the time. So it's hard to really fault them for that. I mean, you can see with some of their innovations, like with iOS and iPadOS and macOS 26 lately, that they've been trying to sort of modernize themselves the
Yeah.
same way they did back when we switched from OS 10 onto
Good
off
catch.
of Next and onto the current kernel. But it's not easy to do. If it were, we wouldn't have Windows 11.
But
So
let's
I can't fault them for that. I
yeah.
really can't.
Sure.
So let's talk. Again, I don't want to get too nerdy here, but let's talk hardware a little bit because Olivier, we're lucky to have you on here because you know this topic better than almost anyone. The emerging platforms for running AI outside the data center, and Apple has done a remarkable job. Their M5 which just came out, is absolutely tremendous. It's very, very high performant. They have an integrated neural processing unit that is really first class. They've got great GPU, great CPU cores. But Apple is no longer alone in having really high performance, low power cores. And you already mentioned, Copilot PCs and Snapdragon. Broadcom is right there. We're hearing that ARM is going to be AMD is developing an ARM processor as well. What's your take on this sort of non-Apple mobile AI or low-powered AI?
Well, I think ARM is sort of like the quiet winner in all of this, and ARM doesn't make chips. At least as far as I know, they don't make chips yet. They just sell licensing, basically IP and architecture to implementers. And so, obviously, one of their biggest customers or implementers is Apple. Another one is NVIDIA. So you see where this is going. The ARM architecture is extremely good for AI applications. The performance per watt characteristics beat x86. And so companies like Intel and ARM that have been the x86 companies for decades
Intel and AMD.
are, yeah.
Yeah.
I made the same mistake 5 seconds ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Have I wouldn't say they've struggled. I think they've done really well in keeping up with what ARM based chips are performing or doing. But we're definitely seeing a sea change, right? We're seeing less Intel and less AMD in the mix of in the PC space, for instance. We're seeing more Windows on ARM come forward. So obviously, Apple is its own thing, and they're ARM-based processors. But Snapdragon entered the PC space a year and a half ago with its Snapdragon X tiers of chips that have done extremely well. at different price tiers and have the longest battery life. They have the best performance per watt of all of them. And we've been hearing rumors for the past year and a half that NVIDIA was also getting into the PC space. Um, it's happening. It's
Just
just
did.
taking a minute. Yeah. And I think it's more of a software issue than a hardware issue. There's not an issue with the processors themselves or the manufacturing, the capabilities. It's a software issue. They're waiting on some of the other pieces of the puzzle to be there before they can launch. But so now you're going to have where you had Intel and AMD with x86 sort of like ruling the PC space. Now you also have Apple, which is ARM. You also have Qualcomm with their Snapdragon X chip, which is ARM. And then you also have NVIDIA. And I think one of the first examples of this, which you mentioned earlier, was the NVIDIA Spark product, right? Which is co-developed with MediaTek, by the way, and it's something that's not super well known. When you look at a diagram of the processor, of basically the board, it's at least 50% MediaTek real estate and NVIDIA as well. And we're seeing a growing partnership between MediaTek and NVIDIA in bringing these bits of hardware to market. And I feel like the NVIDIA PC chip that will come out probably next year is going to be another example of that. So DGX Spark is sort of like the toe in the water of NVIDIA and more Windows on ARM and ARM-based chips entering the PC space and potentially moving into other areas as well.
And I think that's what the takeaway for our listeners is really that you hear a lot about Apple's incredible hardware, and they do make incredible hardware, but they're not alone. And there are many companies making incredible hardware as well. And there's a lot of really exciting stuff on the horizon that I just can't wait to see them announced and add them to this conversation. And then, as you already said as well, on the model side, we also have companies. We've mentioned OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, of course. Microsoft, Meta, XAI. There are so many companies that are working on these sort of foundational models, but Google has actually emerged really as an interesting one because so many of us have Google Workspace accounts and we're able to use Gemini as part of that. I mean, I use it not just daily; I use it many times a day. I probably use Gemini more than ChatGPT, even though I intentionally use ChatGPT more than Gemini, simply because it's just everywhere. And it looks like we're going to be getting it. As I said, with Apple Siri. But there's another news story that I want to hit here before we wrap up, and that's sort of what happens if this technology is everywhere. Is it possible that the AI models could start entering our political discussions? And I don't want to make this too much of a political, but Brad, you brought up this interesting story of Google removing Gemma from its AI studio after a concern from a senator. So let's think about the implications of that when people are trying to implement AI. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, it's hard, and I think it's another vote in favor of the smaller models, the models that you can control and own. And ironically, the model that Google removed that we're talking about was its smaller model. So there's a deep irony there. But the point is that it is the case that if you're investing in AI and you're building solutions on top of it, you're investing in the models and that architecture and the way they work and how they work. And if the rug can be pulled out from under you on any given day because of some political favor or disfavor, that's a risk that many companies would seek to mitigate. And so we're very much seeing, and I think we mentioned it a bit ago, about this ability to do smart routing within frameworks for agentic systems as being an emerging area of interest, that if you can do that and you have you focus more on the engineering, the context engineering than you do on the prompt engineering, then maybe you can start to remove some or mitigate some of the risks of being completely dependent upon a given model or a given model family. But I think we'll never get away from that. And I think that that's okay. Simply because, as we've just been talking about, we all have a preference for how we like to work with models and which models we work best with. And companies are no different. They're the same as us. So, you get a nerd in a model family, you get used to it, you build up engineering knowledge about it. you don't want to jump off of it. So, it's one of those areas that companies just need to be, I think, aware of, and perhaps uh, look to and make investments that mitigate some of the risk that might be associated with this sort of availability, and I would say even more than that, this consistency of the models. I think any of us who have used like OpenAI's ChatGPT over the last couple of years have lamented sometimes the movement from one model to the next because we lose something in the translation, if you will. When we went from 4 to 5, for instance, I think a lot of people were very upset because the model was suddenly not very talkative in a friendly manner. And it's whether you're talking about an avatar that you chat with every night, or you're doing your rag on your pipeline for an important business decision, it's no different. It's the same thing. So it's something to think about.
Yeah. And for the no, I agree with all that. For the enterprise specifically, all of the demos I've seen of AI studios, which are essentially kind of like the marketplace, internal marketplaces and management systems for all of the models that enterprises are running. I feel like we're already in a place where enterprises are testing different models and running different models for different things. But I feel like it's a diversification play. If nothing else, that additional risk that just got introduced into this market of having the rug pulled out from under you because maybe for political reasons or geopolitical reasons, a model or two have to be pulled or they're no longer available. It's going to be really important. For enterprises to work with their technology partners on the software and the hardware side to sort of diversify their agentic and model portfolios, if you will, to kind of de-risk that AI stack that they're trying to build for their companies and for their customers.
Yep, exactly. And I think the nice thing is when it comes to hardware, when it comes to platforms, when it comes to models, when it comes to AI partners, we have an embarrassment of riches here. And
Indeed.
the incredible thing is you can have something like this where something gets basically it's like a recall in the automotive industry. Oops, definitely shouldn't have done that. And yet it is not even a speed bump to the industry because essentially there are even within the context of Google and AI Studio and so on, they have alternatives, and we all have alternatives. In fact, maybe we have too many. It's a little confusing sometimes, I will admit, to deal with models.
I think the term
Gloriously.
is and you've heard it here first, but it's instead of cornucopia, it's cornucope AI.
Oh
Cornucope
dear.
AI. I like that.
That's a dad pun. Yeah.
There it is.
Okay, Dad, whatever you say. Um, Yeah, exactly. And I think that's going to be something as well that we'll be talking about here. But we do have to wrap. Thank you both for joining me for this episode of Utilizing AI podcast from the Futurum Group. As we wrap, I want to give you guys a quick moment. Tell us where we can connect with you. Where can we continue this conversation? Where can we find your coverage of the AI industry? Olivier?
Well, obviously, on all of the Futurum platforms, so look for me there. But also, the best place to find me is usually on X, and that's OA Blanchard. Super simple. Occasionally, you'll see me on TV. Very rarely will I be on LinkedIn.
All right.
I'm absolute opposite. I refuse to go on X, and I spend most of my time on LinkedIn, so under Brad Shimmin. But we're both Olivier and I are on the Futurum sites, and we make rogue appearances wherever we're needed or asked.
As rogue as possible.
You'll be making rogue appearances here as well. And like you, Brad, I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I'm also on the socials. You'll find me on X AI sometimes, but mainly Blue Sky, Mastodon, LinkedIn, and so on, as well as, of course, these. And pretty much every Tuesday on the TechStrong gang. So looking forward to that. We will be back with another episode of Utilizing AI next week. This is going to be a weekly podcast every Wednesday. So please do subscribe. You'll find us in your favorite podcast application. Just look for Utilizing AI. You'll also find these on YouTube. You can subscribe there if you want to see our pretty faces. We would love to hear from you. Drop us a line, drop us a rating or review. This podcast is brought to you by the analysts and experts at the Futurum Group, where insights meet AI. For show notes and more episodes, head over to techstrong.ai. the Utilizing AI YouTube channel, or the TechStrong TV app. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next week.